Welcome to Conversations at SC, being held at the sidelines of the World Capital Market Symposium 2015. I have with me Chris Brycki, founder and CEO of StockSpot, Australia's first online and automated online investment advisor. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me here.
So, Chris, can you tell us what was the impetus behind starting StockSpot in 2013?
Sure. Well, I saw a great opportunity to help a group of people who ordinarily haven't been able to access financial advice because of the costs and the minimum account balances that were required in Australia to access that and access that in a way that they access many other services these days, which is online. So a completely digital investment service isn't something that had existed in Australia before, and I thought there was a great opportunity to launch something like that.
Right. So StockSpot's tagline is, "We're changing the way Australia invests." To what extent do you think you have succeeded in achieving these objectives?
There's a huge group of people actually in Australia who want to invest and want to access investment markets but have been locked out. So I think there's 80% of Australians have said that they want to access in some way or another investment markets, but because accessing a traditional investment advisor or traditional funds is quite expensive, it's been difficult for those people to do it. Traditionally they could set up an online broking account or speak to a broker, but there are also difficulties there, so difficulties in working out how to manage their portfolio and how to manage the asset allocation side. So we saw an opportunity to provide that service to people in a low-cost digital sense.
So I understand about 60% of StockSpot's investors are under 40. So obviously there's a tendency for StockSpot to appeal to the much younger, more tech-savvy generation. How do you think StockSpot would appeal to the sort of older generation that maybe may need more complex financial advice, perhaps, to plan for their retirement or, their children's education? Do you think StockSpot can also service these sort of clients?
Sure, it's a good question. I mean, we do have a large portion of our customers in the younger age range. So as you mentioned, 60 or 70% of our customers are under 40, and many of them are accessing our service because it's an entry-level way of accessing investing for them. But at the same time, we do have a group of investors who are much older, and we even have investors in their 80s that have signed up online, which amazes me even that that investors in that sort of age range would discover a service like ours online. For those sort of investors, I think the theory behind what we're doing is quite similar regardless of whether you're investing $1,000 or $2,000 or $2 million. The portfolios that we build really don't discriminate across different account balances. So while there's probably some parts of the advice required for an older person or a person managing a more complex situation, the investment piece of that advice really doesn't change.
And, some quarters contend that there's only so much machines and algorithms can do, and whether robo-advisors can, completely compete or match with the human personalized service that a traditional fund manager could perhaps offer. I mean, what's your take on that, Chris?
Well, I look at it from a different perspective. So I used to be that sort of human investment manager, and I realised in looking at a lot of other fund managers that they're not exempt to all of the human biases and behavioural biases that cause bad investment decisions. So Roboadvisors didn't exist, for instance, even in the financial crisis, yet that didn't stop people from losing a lot of money because they were over-leveraged or had too much exposure to areas or were chasing markets or doing a lot of things that sensible long-term investing doesn't promote. So from our perspective, robo-advice or automating investing helps people actually counter a lot of these biases that don't only exist in retail or individual investors, but also are quite prevalent in the traditional advice industry.
Okay. We've talked a lot about the benefits and opportunities that robo-advisors, investing through robo-advisory platforms can provide. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about what you see as possible risks. That some have argued that you can get different recommendations coming out from different robo-advisory platforms depending on what you key in or what you input into the system. What is StockSpot's take on this, and what steps have you taken to mitigate these possible risks?
There's probably two big risks that we see potentially coming from this automated advice space. The first, funnily enough, actually comes really from the traditional advice industry, which is conflicts of interest and the ability for conflicts to cause problems in the advice process. So one of our big focuses has been to change the way that people think about advice and the conflict side of things. For instance, seeing a traditional advisor in Australia, 75 to 80% of those advisors are actually aligned to the products that they're recommending. So there's a problem in actually making sure that you're receiving advice that's in your best interest rather than the interest of the person making the recommendation. So while one of the benefits of automated investment services is that they're able to more clearly delineate the difference between the advice provider and the product provider, one of the issues that is already being seen in the US is some of the product providers are putting on top of their products automated advice services, which are then going back and recommending their own products. So this conflict of interest, I think, will continue to permeate the online investment service industry, as well as the same way it's happened in the traditional advice industry. The other risk we see is comes around the structure of how robo-investors are actually are built. So one of the cost savings they're able to achieve is through the combining of lots of different trades and accounts to actually reduce the transaction costs. That is a great benefit for investors, but it also comes with its own set of risks. And one of those risks is counterparty risk. So it's a risk that we haven't really seen or heard much about since the financial crisis, but obviously there are a lot of large organisations that people thought were very safe that failed during the financial crisis, and at some point in the future it's likely to happen again. So automated investment services that really try and cut costs by combining accounts and using a sort of a commingled asset structure also pose risk to investors, and that's why we've focused on making sure our clients' assets are segregated and owned legally and beneficially in the client's own names.
If I now turn to what we're facing today, obviously it's a challenging market environment. Can I have your views in terms of how you think robo-advisory platforms will operate in this sort of market? Obviously we haven't faced, or robo-advisory platforms haven't really faced major financial market stresses prior to this. Do you think that they can survive in a bear market?
It's one of the questions that especially a lot of people, I guess, against robo-advice have proposed, is that without that human touch, people are more exposed to making bad decisions when markets go down. That so far hasn't been our experience, and we've had a small test already. So the Australian market, for instance, and that's one of the primary investments in our portfolios, has fallen about 20% from its recent highs. So a reasonable size correction in the scheme of things. But so far we haven't seen an exodus from our product. In fact, most of our clients have actually been taking this as an opportunity to top up their accounts, which is positive from our perspective because it shows that they're not over leveraged, and also the education and the content that we're writing and helping them understand is helping them make the right decision, which for a long-term investor is to actually use market dips as an opportunity to build onto their portfolio, as opposed to a reason to get scared and follow the hysteria that they see in the media.
So obviously the lower cost and convenience of robo-advisors are reinventing the way investment advice is being provided in many parts of the world. We've seen it in the United States, in the UK, in Australia. What do you think are the growth prospects for robo-advisors in emerging markets?
I think in emerging markets, prospects are probably even larger than in the developed markets because there's probably an even larger group of unserviced people. So as a proportion of our population, while the unserviced the group is large, I think in other markets there's even a larger group of people that are tech savvy, that are younger, and then also looking for ways to consume financial services in the same way they consume media or shopping or other industries. So I think for emerging markets, tapping into that young demographic of tech savvy people, which don't necessarily have huge investment balances to start with, but over time will grow to have a large amount of savings, is a massive opportunity.
Right. And from the perspective of regulators, are there any areas that you think regulators, capital market regulators, can do to facilitate the growth of robo-advisors in their respective markets? Is there any advice that you can give?
I'm not sure they should be sort of facilitating their growth, but they should be allowing them to grow, and they should be allowing digital services that open up financial services to flourish, but obviously within the same regulatory environment that the larger players and the incumbents have to operate within as well. So I think as long as the regulators are open to understanding how these new services work and understanding the risks and understanding how they can manage those risks, I think they can definitely be a positive effect on this market. And we've already seen that in markets like the UK, for instance, where the regulator's taken a huge positive stance, and even in Australia recently, the regulator has been very positive about financial technology and set up their own their own hub within financial technology hubs, and in Malaysia as well. Obviously, having a conference like this shows that the regulator is very keen to promote financial technology.
So Chris, robo-advisory platforms are doing very well in Australia and other parts of the world. How do you think the competition is viewing the rise of these platforms?
Well, I think for a start they're a little bit threatened because I think a lot of these lower cost models are eating away potentially at the margins these businesses have. And in Australia we're in a situation where our large banks are not only some of the largest in the world, but they have some of the largest margins in the world. So they have a big interest in trying to maintain those margins. And I think a lot of these disruptive business models, whether it's in peer-to-peer payments or peer-to-peer lending, payments or wealth management, are really threatened to change the cost structure, but then also the profitability of their traditional models. So I think a lot of the big players in Australia are still looking at ways that they can use their existing business models and then just bolt on financial technology, which from our perspective isn't probably the right way to do it, because if you're trying to bolt it onto your legacy systems, you're still going to have the same costs and you're still going to have the similar value proposition as you used to have, as opposed to completely reinventing that.
And in terms of reaching out to investors, what is StockSpot's model in terms of reaching out as well as educating investors in investing on the platform?
Well, finding customers in financial services is quite expensive. In markets like Australia, where the big players have huge marketing budgets, it's very difficult to get your voice out there. And for instance, in online marketing, the big players have such huge budgets that playing in search or keywords is very difficult and quite prohibitive. So we have to be quite innovative in how we connect with our customers and potential customers. One of our big focuses, first of all, is in making sure that our service is loved by our existing customers, because building advocates of our existing customers is the best way to reach new customers. If they love our service and are enjoying the benefits of using our service, then they hopefully will tell their friends and family and other people that they're happy with our product. And I think a lot of tech companies have built their businesses in that way. Rather than going through traditional advertising, they've tried to build a strong advocacy within their existing customers, and referrals have actually been a big source of new customers. So I mean, that's one way we've looked to attract customers, but also, as you mentioned, educating the public about some of the problems with the traditional industry has been a big focus for us. So for instance, last year we put out a report which is called the Fat Cat Funds Report.
Right.
Now this report looked at some of the traditional fund managers and the fees that they charge and the performance that they've been achieving after fees, and it was quite a shocking report that showed about 80% of fund managers over 5 years have underperformed the indices. And the amount of fees that they've been taking from consumers over that period have been enormous. So in Australia we pay about $26 billion per year in investment fees, which is a huge drag on investment performance. So that education part is really helping us also connect with consumers. It also ruffles a few feathers in the big organisations, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because as a disruptor, if you're not causing a few problems within the big players, then you're probably not doing your job right.
And how do you manage to keep the cost down? I mean, obviously, relying on technology, but if you can just explain a little bit more in terms of how StockSpot has managed to keep the costs down for investors.
Well, I think with a lot of disruptive business models, the first step has been in to understand the value chain. And in the value chain in investment management in Australia is layered. So first of all, customers pay the investment advisor. The investment advisor then recommends a platform or a way to access products. And then on top of that platform, there are products. Now each of those layers basically creates a cost and a fee, and so a lot of our focus has been working out on which of those layers customers actually need and which ones they actually want, and then making sure that we're not providing any services that clients don't actually need. So actually stripping away a lot of excess costs that have been sitting in the industry, and because of the concentration of the big players, really haven't been looked at properly. So we've been able to take out a lot of the huge overheads that have existed in the industry. For instance, the actual physical provision of advice with an actual person is quite an expensive exercise, especially since a lot of these investment professionals are paid very well. But then also, and probably more than that even, is the middle piece, which is the distribution and platform side, which has really been gouging consumers in countries not only like Australia, but in the US, the UK and Malaysia as well, potentially, because they own the distribution channel, and by owning distribution they actually have a lot of power in the pricing. So using online as a new distribution mechanism is actually the biggest change that we're taking advantage of.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for being with us on Conversations at SC.
Thank you.